Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Torah in 10. This week's Torah portion is called Kedoshim, which means holy people. It picks back up here in Leviticus 19, chapter 1, and goes through chapter 20, verse 27. I'm also going to tack on the reading titled Emor, which is to speak or to say, which will take us all the way through Leviticus 24. So I'm going to tack both those on. And so we'll cover both those portions this week for our Sabbath reading. And so this part of the Torah that we're going to go over is often referred to as the heart of the Torah, really meaning, what's the essence, what's the meaning behind, these instructions and following these, guidelines and commandments. And really what it all boils down to. And so well, when you read through this, it's probably going to sound pretty familiar, and most think that these teachings are just original to our New Testament, and that these were brand new commandments that Yeshua, Jesus, was teaching. When actually the reality is that they actually came from the Torah, which Yeshua, Jesus, he is the lawgiver himself. Yeshua is the one who gave the commandments to Moses on Mount Sinai. So Leviticus 19:17, it talks about how it says right here, the Torah portion, Leviticus 19:17 says that not to have hate in your heart. And remember, Yeshua, Jesus, he taught this in Matthew 5:22. In fact, he made it equivalent that if you hate someone in your heart, it's equivalent to murder. So, what does Jesus do? He doesn't take a new commandment or new teaching here and talk about it. No, he's actually talking about the original principle and commandment. But he actually, a lot of people say, well, Jesus came so we don't have to, bury that burden of keeping those commandments anymore. Well, does that really make sense? Here we see Jesus repeating the commandment, but instead he actually takes it to another level. Instead of it being like a physical act of murder, which is a lot easier to abstain from, I think, he actually makes it a issue of the heart inside, pretty much putting this commandment on steroids is how I like to put it. So, we know that in Matthew 5:17, Yeshua did not come to abolish the law, but he came to fulfill it, bring it to full meaning, which is the heart. It's all about the heart. And again, that's why this portion is called the heart of the Torah. Leviticus 19:18 says we are to love our neighbor as ourselves. Well, Yeshua taught this same thing in Matthew 22, verses 35 through 40. It says one of them, a lawyer was just someone who was like an expert in the Torah, the law. And he asked him a question, testing him, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And he said to him, Jesus, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and foremost commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself." On these two commandments depend the whole law and the prophets. So this wasn't a new commandment. Jesus, Yeshua, wasn't saying, hey, we're getting rid of all that stuff. He's saying that, look, those two are the greatest of all the commandments that were given. And in fact, all the commandments hang on those two individually. What does he mean by that? Well, you've got two tablets, right? And they've got 10 commandments. If you put the first 5 on one tablet, the other 5 on the second tablet, the first 5 commandments in Exodus 20 deal with how you are to love God, how you are to reverence God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. The other 5, the second set, is all those commandments are addressing how we treat one another and how we love one another. So literally, both these commandments, the whole Torah hangs on those two. Galatians 13, when you get a chance, our some of our Brit Hadasha portion, the New Testament, we're going to be reading Romans 13, verses 8 through 10, Galatians chapter 5, 13 through 26. And it says this, and I'll just paraphrase it. Please go do your own reading on it. But it says, love fulfills and fills up the law, the Torah. It doesn't do away with it. 1 Corinthians 13:2 verses 3 says it this way, and this is really this is the big takeaway. And it's all about the heart, and it's all about love. It says here, this is Paul. He says, if I have the gift of prophecy, and I know all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to even remove mountains, but I do not have love, I am nothing. I can give all my possessions away and feed the poor, and if I surrender my body to be burned, but if I do not have love, it profits me nothing. Right? You can follow all these commandments and, try to treat it like a checklist behavior, like, oh, I'm doing, I'm not eating pork and I'm, doing these feasts and obeying the commandment for the Sabbath and all this stuff. And look, that doesn't mean anything if your heart doesn't love your neighbor. If you don't love, then you might as well just forget it. You need to go back to square one. Make sure you got, get the heart right, because all this stuff's just going to be a stench in God's nostrils if you're not doing it, if you're not even loving your neighbor. So I know a lot of people can get, they get haughty and get prideful, and it's like, oh, I'm following Torah and I'm obeying the Lord, but great. But if you don't have love and you're not loving your neighbor, and you got pride, which is, again, we talked about previously, is a huge abomination, and there's a heart issue there. So get that right. That's got to be the core. The heart of the Torah is really around loving God and loving your neighbor, and all the other stuff just stems off of it, right? So Leviticus 20, I want to read Leviticus 20, 25 through 26. This is again out of our Torah portion. It says, "You shall therefore distinguish between clean animals and unclean animals, between clean birds and unclean birds and clean birds. And you shall not make yourself abominable by beast or by bird or by any kind of living thing that creeps on the ground, which I have separated from you as clean. And you shall be my holy people, for I, the Lord, am holy. And I have separated you from the peoples, that you should be mine." So all these things that we're reading about, from from what we eat to the commandments that we follow and the Sabbath, these are all things that have been put in place to separate us from everyone else in the world. In our Haftorah portion in Ezekiel 20, verse 2 through 20, it talks about how the law, or the Torah, and the Sabbaths are a sign between him and us. And I'll read just a couple verses. It says, "And I gave him my statutes, and I showed him my judgments. And I gave him," in the other translations will say, "I gave him my rules, and I gave him my instructions, which if a man does, he shall live by them. Moreover, I also gave them my Sabbaths, to be a sign between them and me, that they might know that I am the Lord who sanctifies them," or separates them. "I am the Lord your God. Walk in my commandments, keep my statutes, and do them. Hallow my Sabbaths, and they will be a sign between me and you, that you may know that I am the Lord your God." That's Ezekiel chapter 20. Our Haftorah portion is verses 2 through 20. So please go read that. So what we're seeing right there is that God has put these commandments and the Sabbaths as a way to kind of distinguish us from the rest of the world. And also in Leviticus 23, in the Emor portion, which is to speak, Leviticus 23 talks about God's appointed times in his holy days, his moedims, which is an appointed time. And it says in Leviticus 23, right off the bat, it says, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, the feasts of the Lord, which you shall proclaim to be holy, convocations, these are my feasts." So what he's saying right there is, he says, I'll just read it one more time. "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, the feasts of the Lord, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations, these are my feasts." These aren't feasts for just people living in Israel. It's not just for Jews. It's not just for, it doesn't matter what your DNA is. It says these are the Lord's feasts. These are my feasts. These are God's. So if you're a child of God, or you're a follower of God, you're going to observe his, because it's not about a genealogy or a DNA or your culture. And that's a big thing that it gets missed among modern Christians today, is that we think all this stuff is for Jewish people. But, look, these are the Lord's feasts, and these are what separates us. I'm going to wrap up here, because I know I'm trying to keep it under 10, and I haven't been doing a very good job with that, by the way, but I'll try to get better. But let me just kind of summarize this. There's a reason why, when you look at the 10 Commandments, and I was just talking with my nephew last night about this a little bit, when you look at the 10 Commandments that we have, other false religions out there and other belief systems, and whether it's Buddhist or actually, you can even talk to someone who claims to be an atheist, and you can ask them, go through the 10 Commandments, and 90% of them, 9 of the 10, they're going to, without having any Bible teaching in them or any subscription to a religion and claiming, there is no God, they're going to agree with you that, yeah, you're right. It's not right to murder. We shouldn't steal. We shouldn't, covet and, jealousy and all this stuff and lie and bear false witness. They're going to agree with you on that. But the one sticking point that separates us as Christians and followers of God throughout all the different religions and false religions, really, that are out there is the fourth commandment, the Sabbath, keeping his Sabbath or Sabbaths, his holy days. That distinguishes us from every other false religion and God that's out there. Remember, the Sabbath was created way before Mount Sinai and Moses and the Ten Commandments. It was in Genesis 2 when God created the earth, and he said on the seventh day, I'm separating this day, setting it apart as a holy day. And when we observe and keep that Sabbath, we are proclaiming as a testimony to the outside world and all these other false religions that we are serving the God that created the universe, the God that created the heavens and the earth. That's the true God that we serve, none of these other false ones. And like I said, 90% of the other commandments, you're going to find everyone to kind of agree with. But it's the big sticking point is, and it's got to be an important one. The Sabbath's got to be important to God because it made the cut. If you're going to have 10 commandments and Sabbath is number 4, it must have been probably pretty high on his priority list. And if you read the scriptures from the front of the book to the back of the book, there's no indication that it's ever been diminished or of less value. Again, from the beginning of the book that we read here, even in Genesis and Exodus, in Leviticus, and then also here in Ezekiel, which is close to halfway through the book, God's still telling his children to, don't profane them, don't do it. It's a sign between you and I. And remember, all this stuff that we're talking about doesn't make us holy or righteous. I want to make that clear. I always try to make that clear on these videos, that none of this stuff is going to make us holy or righteous, only through God's grace and our faith through Yeshua, Messiah, Jesus Christ, that we're going to be found right in right standing with our Creator, with God. But obedience to his word and his Torah sets us apart as his children, and it produces the blessings. Obedience produces blessings. Disobedience produces curses. And so anyways, again, it goes all, and I'll just summarize or end it with this too. Remember, all of this stuff doesn't matter if, number one, your heart's not right and you don't have love. Have love. Love God. Love your neighbor. He created us all, and that's what we need to be led by the Spirit to do. I hope this has helped you or been beneficial to you. May the Lord bless you and keep you. Shalom.